The scream pierced the morning air just as Frank Mason reached for his coffee. His hand froze mid-air. That wasn't just any scream. It was his daughter's voice. "Emily?" His mug crashed to the floor as he bolted from the kitchen. At 62, his knees protested every step, but adrenaline propelled him up the stairs of their lakeside home. The door to Emily's bedroom was ajar. He pushed it open to find her standing by the window, her face pale as a sheet. "Dad, look! Someone's drowning!" Frank rushed to the window. Through the morning mist hanging over Lake Willow, he could make out a figure splashing frantically about 30 yards from shore. Without hesitation, he grabbed the binoculars from Emily's desk. The struggling swimmer was just a kid, a boy, maybe 13 or 14. Get ready. You think you know where this story is going, but trust me, you don't. Let us know where you're listening from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. "Call 911!" Frank shouted, already halfway down the stairs. Years of teaching high school physics hadn't prepared him for this. But those summer lifeguard jobs during college, those might just save a life today. Frank burst through the back door and raced down the wooden dock. His robe flapped behind him as he kicked off his slippers. Despite the April chill, he dove into the water without a second thought. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath. For a moment, he wondered if his heart might simply stop. But then, muscle memory took over, and he began to swim. "Hang on, kid," he called, his voice carrying across the water. "I'm coming." The boy's splashing grew weaker. Just as Frank reached him, the kid slipped under the surface. Frank took a deep breath and went down after him, his eyes stinging in the murky water. His hand found fabric, a hoodie, and he pulled upward with all his might. They broke the surface together, the boy limp in his arms. "I've got you," Frank gasped, turning the kid onto his back and beginning the awkward swim to shore, one arm wrapped around the boy's chest. By the time Frank's feet found the lake bottom, his muscles were screaming in protest. He dragged the unconscious boy onto the small beach beside the dock, where Emily waited with a phone pressed to her ear. "They're coming, Dad," she said, her voice shaking. 5 minutes. Frank nodded, too winded to speak. He tilted the boy's head back, checked for breathing, and finding none, began CPR. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Repeat. The boy's skin was cold, his lips blue. "Come on, kid," Frank muttered between compressions. "Don't give up now." On the 4th cycle, the boy suddenly convulsed, water spilling from his mouth as he coughed violently. Frank turned him onto his side, relief washing over him like a physical wave. "That's it," he encouraged. "Breathe." The boy's eyes fluttered open, brown eyes, confused and frightened. "Where?" he croaked. "You're safe," Frank said. "You were swimming in the lake." The boy shook his head weakly. "Wasn't swimming. Was..." Whatever he was trying to say was interrupted by the wail of approaching sirens. Within minutes, paramedics swarmed the beach, gently moving Frank aside to attend to the boy. One draped a thermal blanket over Frank's shoulders, noticing his shivering. "Sir, you need to get warm too," the young paramedic said. Frank nodded absently, his eyes fixed on the boy being lifted onto a stretcher. "What's his name?" he asked. A female paramedic looked up from her clipboard. "ID says Tyler Williams. We're taking him to Mercy General." "I'll follow you there," Frank said automatically. Emily placed a hand on his arm. "Dad, you need to change first. You're soaking wet and freezing." She was right, of course. Frank allowed his daughter to lead him back to the house, where he quickly showered and changed into warm clothes. His mind raced with questions. What was a kid doing swimming alone in the lake so early in the morning? In April, no less, when the water was barely 50 degrees. 30 minutes later, Frank and Emily sat in the waiting room of Mercy General Hospital. Frank clutched a cup of mediocre coffee, his third since arriving. "Mr. Mason?" A doctor with tired eyes and silver-streaked hair approached them. Her name tag read, Dr. Sarah Chen. "I understand you're the one who pulled Tyler from the lake?" Frank nodded. "How is he?" "Stable. His body temperature is almost back to normal, and his lungs are clear. You saved his life, Mr. Mason." "Thank God," Frank murmured. "Does his family know?" Dr. Chen's expression tightened slightly. "That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. We've been trying to reach Tyler's guardian, his grandmother, but haven't had any luck. The boy is asking for you." "For me?" Frank was surprised. He doesn't even know who I am. Nevertheless, he's asking for the man who pulled me out. "Would you mind?" Frank glanced at Emily, who nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead, Dad. I'll wait here." Following Dr. Chen down the corridor, Frank felt oddly nervous. What could he possibly say to this kid? The doctor paused outside room 212. "One more thing," she said quietly. "Tyler wasn't swimming this morning. He was attempting suicide." The words hit Frank like a physical blow. "What? But he's just a child." 14, Dr. Chen confirmed. "He left a note in his backpack, which was found on the dock. The police have it now." Frank ran a hand over his face, suddenly feeling every one of his 62 years. "I had no idea." "Of course not. Just be gentle with him." Tyler looked smaller in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors that beeped steadily. When Frank entered, the boy's gaze flicked to him briefly before returning to the window. "Hey, Tyler," Frank said, approaching slowly. "I'm Frank Mason. I live in the blue house on the lake." Tyler didn't respond. Up close, Frank could see fading bruises on the boy's arm, yellowing at the edges. "The doctor says you're going to be okay," Frank continued, settling into the chair beside the bed. "Why did you do it?" Tyler's voice was barely audible. Frank blinked. "Do what?" "Save me." Now Tyler turned to look at him directly. "You don't even know me." The question blindsided Frank. How could he explain something that had required no thought at all? "Because you needed saving," he said simply. Tyler's eyes welled with tears. "I didn't want to be saved." "I know." Frank's voice was gentle. "And I'm sorry you're hurting so badly, but I'm not sorry I pulled you out." They sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the steady beep of the heart monitor. "My grandmother's going to be so mad," Tyler finally whispered. "She works night shifts. She won't be home until noon." "I'm sure she'll just be relieved you're alive," Frank said. Tyler's bitter laugh held no humor. "Shows what you know." Before Frank could respond, a social worker arrived, a young woman with bright eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Tyler, I'm Ms. Patel," she said. "I need to ask you some questions. Would you mind giving us a moment?" This last part was directed at Frank. "Sure," Frank said, standing. He hesitated, then added, "Tyler, I'll be in the waiting room if you want to talk later." The boy didn't acknowledge him. Back in the waiting room, Frank filled Emily in on what he'd learned. His daughter, a high school counselor, listened with professional concern. "Poor kid," she said when he finished. "Do you know anything about his home situation?" Frank shook his head. "Nothing. But those bruises on his arms didn't come from falling off a bike." Emily's lips thinned into a hard line. "I hope they don't send him right back to whatever drove him into that lake." Hours passed. Frank sent Emily home to get some rest. She had her own family to care for. But he couldn't bring himself to leave. Not yet. He dozed in the uncomfortable waiting room chair, waking with a start when Ms. Patel touched his shoulder. "Mr. Mason? Tyler's grandmother has finally been reached. She's on her way." Her expression was carefully neutral. "He's asking for you again." When Frank re-entered Tyler's room, the boy was sitting up, picking at the edge of his blanket. "They're going to make me talk to people," Tyler said without preamble. "Therapists and stuff." "That might help," Frank offered. Tyler looked unconvinced. After a moment, he said, "My grandmother's boyfriend is the reason you know." Frank nodded, careful to keep his expression calm despite the anger flaring inside him. "Have you told Ms. Patel?" "Yeah." Tyler's fingers worried a loose thread on the blanket. She says I might have to go into foster care for a while." The words hung in the air between them. Frank thought of his empty house. Too big since his wife died 3 years ago. Too quiet since Emily moved out to start her own family. He thought of the unused bedroom that had once belonged to his son, Michael, who now lived across the country in Seattle. "Foster care can be good," Frank said cautiously. "A fresh start." Tyler's eyes met his, surprisingly direct. "Have you ever been in foster care?" "No," Frank admitted. "Then you don't know." The boy looked back down at his blanket. "Mr. Mason, thanks for fishing me out, even if I didn't want you to." "You're welcome, Tyler." Frank hesitated, then reached into his pocket for a business card from the high school where he taught. He scribbled his cell number on the back. "If you ever need to talk or anything, call me, okay?" Tyler took the card, studying it. "You're a physics teacher?" "Yeah. Boring, right?" A ghost of a smile touched Tyler's lips. "Actually, I like science." Before Frank could respond, a commotion in the hallway announced the arrival of Tyler's grandmother, a harsh-voiced woman demanding to know what her grandson had done now. As the voices grew louder, Tyler's face closed like a shuttered window. He quickly tucked the card under his pillow and straightened, his expression going blank. Frank stood. "Should I stay?" Tyler shook his head minutely. "Better not." Frank nodded, understanding. "Remember what I said. Any time." As Frank stepped into the hallway, moving past the small whirlwind that was Tyler's grandmother, he couldn't shake the feeling that this morning's rescue was only the beginning of something. Whatever came next, he knew with absolute certainty that he'd just pulled 2 people from that lake, Tyler Williams and himself. 2 weeks passed before Frank heard anything about Tyler Williams. He'd checked with the hospital the day after the rescue, only to be told that Tyler had been discharged and that privacy laws prevented them from sharing more information. Frank understood, of course, but that didn't stop him from wondering about the boy with sad eyes who'd thanked him for a rescue he hadn't wanted. May brought warmer weather to Lake Willow. Frank's high school physics students were getting restless as summer approached, their attention wandering to the windows where sunshine and freedom beckoned. He didn't blame them. After 35 years of teaching, he knew the pattern well. "Mr. Mason?" A voice interrupted his thoughts as he erased equations from the whiteboard after his last class on Friday. Frank turned to find Emily standing in his classroom doorway, a manila folder tucked under her arm. His daughter rarely visited him at school, despite working as a counselor in the same building. "Hey, Em, everything okay?" She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "I have some news about Tyler Williams." Frank set down the eraser. "You do? How?" "He's being placed in foster care," Emily said, sitting on the edge of a student desk. "His case came across my desk because they're enrolling him here starting Monday." A mixture of concern and relief washed over Frank. "So they didn't send him back to his grandmother?" Emily shook her head. "Child Protective Services found evidence of ongoing abuse. The grandmother's boyfriend is facing charges." She paused. "Tyler specifically requested to come to this school. I think it might have something to do with a certain physics teacher." Frank felt a strange tightness in his chest. "He kept my card," he murmured. "More than that," Emily said, opening the folder. "He asked if you could be his mentor in our school's New Horizons program." Frank blinked. The New Horizons program paired struggling students with teacher mentors for weekly check-ins and support. "Me? I'm not even trained for that kind of thing." Emily smiled. "Dad, you've been mentoring kids for decades. You just didn't have an official title for it." She slid a form across the desk. "You don't have to decide right now, but Tyler starts on Monday. His foster family lives about 5 miles from here. The Pattersons. Good people, from what I hear." Frank stared at the form, remembering the look on Tyler's face when his grandmother had arrived at the hospital. "I'll do it," he said, picking up a pen. "Where do I sign?" Monday morning arrived with a spring thunderstorm that drummed against the windows of Frank's classroom. He'd spent the weekend cleaning out the spare bedroom at home, though he wasn't entirely sure why. It wasn't as if Tyler would be visiting. Still, the activity had given him something to focus on besides his nerves. During his third period class, Frank spotted Tyler sitting in the back row. The boy kept his eyes down, shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself invisible. When the bell rang, Frank called out, "Tyler, could you stay for a moment?" The other students filed out, casting curious glances at the new kid. Tyler approached Frank's desk slowly, still not making eye contact. "How's your first day going?" Frank asked, keeping his tone casual. Tyler shrugged. "Fine, I guess." "The Pattersons treating you okay?" "They're nice." Tyler fidgeted with the zipper of his hoodie. "Their house has like 1,000,000 rules, though." Frank nodded. "That's probably good. Structure helps." An awkward silence stretched between them until Frank said, "I hear you signed up for the mentoring program." At this, Tyler finally looked up. "Is that okay? I mean, if you don't want to—" "I'm glad you asked for me," Frank interrupted gently. "We're supposed to meet once a week. Would Thursdays after school work for you? We could grab a snack at the cafeteria." Tyler's posture relaxed slightly. "Yeah, that works." "Good." Frank wrote him a late pass for his next class. "See you Thursday, then." The first few mentoring sessions were stilted. Tyler answered Frank's questions with minimal words, and Frank struggled to find topics that would draw the boy out. But by their fourth meeting, something shifted. Frank had brought 2 root beer floats, a peace offering of sorts, and mentioned offhandedly that he was having trouble setting up a new telescope he'd bought. "You have a telescope?" Tyler asked, suddenly interested. "Just got it," Frank said, "but the instructions might as well be in Greek for all the sense they make to me." "I could help," Tyler offered, then immediately looked down as if regretting the words. "I mean, if you want." That Saturday, Tyler appeared on Frank's doorstep, having ridden his bike the 5 miles from the Patterson home. For 2 hours, they worked together on the telescope, Tyler methodically reading instructions while Frank assembled the pieces. When they finally carried it out to the deck overlooking the lake, the sun was just beginning to set. "We'll have to wait a couple hours for good star visibility," Frank said. Tyler nodded, his eyes on the lake where water lapped gently against the shore. It was the first time he'd been back since the day Frank pulled him out. "Are you okay being here?" Frank asked carefully. "Yeah." Tyler's voice was quiet but steady. "It's different in the daylight." They ended up grilling hamburgers while waiting for darkness to fall. Tyler ate 2, plus a helping of the potato salad Emily had left in Frank's fridge during her last visit. As they sat on the deck chairs watching the first stars appear, Tyler finally spoke about what had brought him to the lake that April morning. "My grandma's boyfriend, Rick, he'd been hurting me for months, not just hitting, but saying things too. That I was worthless, that no one would care if I was gone." Tyler's voice was flat, emotionless. That night, he'd been drinking more than usual. He said if I told anyone about the bruises, he'd hurt my grandma too. Frank remained silent, giving Tyler space to continue. "I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how tired I was of being scared all the time. So I wrote a note, took my bike to the lake, and—" He shrugged. "You know the rest." "I'm glad I was there," Frank said simply. Tyler nodded. "I am too now." He pointed up at the darkening sky. "Look, we can see Venus already." They spent the next hour with the telescope, Frank showing Tyler how to find the brighter constellations. When Mr. Patterson came to pick Tyler up, the boy seemed reluctant to leave. "Can I come back sometime?" he asked as they packed up the telescope. "Anytime," Frank replied, surprising himself with how much he meant it. As spring melted into summer, Tyler became a regular fixture at Frank's lakeside home. When school ended in June, their Thursday meetings continued, now involving fishing off the dock or working on small projects around the house. Frank learned that Tyler was smart, remarkably so. But years of chaos at home had left gaps in his education that he was determined to fill. I want to take honors classes next year, Tyler announced one afternoon as they painted the shed behind Frank's house. Do you think I could handle it? I think you can handle anything you set your mind to, Frank replied honestly. And I'll help you catch up over the summer if you want. By July, Tyler was staying overnight occasionally, sleeping in the room that had once belonged to Frank's son. The Pattersons were supportive of the arrangement, recognizing the positive effect Frank had on their foster son. For his part, Frank found that having Tyler around filled an emptiness he hadn't fully acknowledged. One evening, as they sat on the dock watching fireflies dance over the water, Tyler asked, "Do you ever get lonely here by yourself?" Frank considered the question. Sometimes, but less so lately. Tyler nodded, understanding. After a moment, he said, "My caseworker says my grandma's doing better. She's in a program for alcohol. Rick's in jail." Frank felt a twinge of concern. "Are they talking about sending you back to her?" "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Tyler tossed a pebble into the lake, watching the ripples spread. "I don't know how I feel about that." "You don't have to know right now," Frank assured him. The conversation might have ended there, but Tyler suddenly said, "Mr. Mason, I've been having dreams about the lake, about drowning." Frank turned to look at the boy, alarm creeping up his spine. "Bad dreams?" "Not exactly." Tyler frowned, trying to find the words. "In the dreams, I'm sinking, but I'm not scared. Then I hear your voice calling me, and I start fighting to get to the surface." He looked embarrassed. "That probably sounds stupid." "Not at all," Frank said. "Sounds like your brain processing what happened, choosing to live." Tyler seemed to consider this. "Yeah, maybe." In August, Emily organized a birthday party for Frank at the lake house. Since retiring from full-time teaching and switching to substitute work, she had more time for family events. Frank's son Michael flew in from Seattle with his wife and their 5-year-old twins. Frank's brother Tom drove up from Florida. Even a few of Frank's longtime colleagues showed up with gifts and stories. Throughout the celebration, Tyler hovered at the edges, clearly uncomfortable with so many strangers. Frank made sure to introduce him to everyone, his hand resting reassuringly on the boy's shoulder. "This is Tyler, my friend," he said each time. "Not the kid I pulled from the lake, or my mentee, but my friend." Later, after most of the guests had gone home, Michael cornered his father in the kitchen under the pretense of helping with dishes. "So, what's the deal with the kid?" he asked, lowering his voice. "Emily filled me in on how you met, but are you sure getting this involved is a good idea?" Frank paused in loading the dishwasher. "What do you mean?" Michael shrugged uncomfortably. "It's just, he's not your responsibility, Dad. And after what happened with Mom, I worry about you taking on too much." "Tyler's not a burden, Michael," Frank said, more sharply than intended. "He's a kid who needed someone to care about him, and for whatever reason, that someone turned out to be me." Okay. Michael held up his hands in surrender. "I just don't want to see you get hurt if they send him back to his family or something." Frank sighed, his anger fading. "I know you're looking out for me, but Tyler and we helped each other. I was just going through the motions after your mom died. He gave me a reason to start living again." From the doorway, a small voice said, "Mr. Mason?" Frank turned to find Tyler standing there, eyes wide. How much had he heard? "Hey, buddy. What's up?" "Mrs. Patterson just called. She says it's time for me to come home." Tyler glanced briefly at Michael, then back to Frank. "She said to tell you thanks for including me today." "Of course," Frank said. "Let me grab my keys and I'll drive you back." The car ride to the Patterson home was quiet. As they pulled into the driveway, Frank turned to Tyler. "Michael's twins are staying for the week. I thought maybe we could take them fishing on Tuesday if you're free. They've never caught a fish before." Tyler hesitated. "Your son doesn't like me very much." So he had heard. Frank chose his words carefully. "Michael doesn't know you yet. He's just being protective. Give him time." Tyler nodded but didn't seem convinced. "Mr. Mason? What you said in the kitchen about me helping you, did you mean that?" Frank looked at the boy beside him, no longer the pale, desperate child he'd pulled from the lake, but someone stronger, slowly healing. "Every word," he said. As Tyler got out of the car, Frank added, "Hey, I've been thinking. Since we're friends now, maybe you could start calling me Frank instead of Mr. Mason. Outside of school, anyway." A small smile touched Tyler's lips. "Okay, Frank. See you Tuesday." Frank watched until Tyler was safely inside before pulling away from the curb. As he drove back to his empty house, which wouldn't feel empty for long with grandkids running around, he thought about how life could change in an instant. How a desperate act on a misty morning had led to an unexpected second chance for both of them. Sometimes, Frank reflected, the people we save end up saving us right back. The first day of the new school year arrived with a heat wave that left the classroom stuffy despite the air conditioning. Frank wiped sweat from his forehead as he wrote equations on the whiteboard for his first period physics class. At 63, he'd seriously considered retirement over the summer, but something kept holding him back. That something had a name: Tyler Williams. Tyler, now 15, had moved up to the 10th grade and into Frank's honors physics class. The boy who had once tried to disappear at the back of the classroom now sat front and center, hand shooting up to answer questions before other students had even processed them. His summer of catch-up work with Frank had paid off. After class, Tyler lingered by Frank's desk, waiting for the other students to file out. "Everything okay?" Frank asked, erasing the board. "Yeah." Tyler shifted his backpack from one shoulder to the other. "Mr. Patterson wants to know if you're still coming for dinner Friday. He's grilling steaks." Frank smiled. Over the past few months, he'd become friends with Tyler's foster parents, Ken and Diane Patterson. They were good people, a nurse and a carpenter with grown children of their own, who had opened their home to foster kids for nearly a decade. "Wouldn't miss it," Frank assured him. "Tell Diane I'll bring that apple pie she likes from Wilson's Bakery." Tyler nodded, then hesitated. "Can I still come over after school today? I have that lab report to finish." "Of course. Doors always open for you, you know that." A smile brightened Tyler's face before he hurried off to his next class. Frank watched him go, a mixture of pride and concern settling in his chest. The boy had made incredible progress since that terrible morning in April, but Frank couldn't shake the feeling that Tyler's recovery was still fragile, like thin ice over deep water. That afternoon, as they worked side by side at Frank's kitchen table, Tyler's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it, and Frank saw his face pale. "What is it?" Frank asked. Tyler hesitated, then pushed the phone across the table. The message was from an unknown number. "I know where you are. We need to talk. Grandma." "How did she get your number?" Frank asked, keeping his voice calm despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. "I don't know," Tyler said, his voice small. "I haven't talked to her since, you know." Frank nodded. After Tyler's suicide attempt, his grandmother had initially been combative with social services. Then, she'd seemingly disappeared into her own problems, missing court dates and visitations. The last they'd heard, she was living in a women's shelter 2 towns over. "Have you told the Pattersons about this?" Tyler shook his head. "I just got it. Should I?" He trailed off, looking uncertain. "You should definitely tell them," Frank said firmly. "And your caseworker too. Do you want me to go with you when you talk to them?" Relief flooded Tyler's face. "Would you? I don't want to mess things up. The Pattersons have been so good to me." "Nothing's going to get messed up," Frank assured him, though he wasn't entirely convinced. Family situations could get complicated fast, as he well knew from his years of teaching. That evening, Frank sat at the Pattersons' kitchen table, Tyler beside him as they showed the text message to Ken and Diane. Ken's normally cheerful face was serious, his carpenter's hands folded tightly in front of him. "I already called Sarah," Diane said, referring to Tyler's caseworker. "She's coming over first thing tomorrow." She reached across the table to squeeze Tyler's hand. "Don't worry, honey. You're staying right here with us." Later, as Frank was preparing to leave, Ken walked him to the door. "Thanks for bringing this to our attention right away," he said quietly. "Of course," Frank replied. "I'm worried about him, though. He was just starting to feel secure." Ken nodded. "We'll keep a close eye on him. Sarah thinks the grandmother might be angling to regain custody now that her boyfriend's locked up." "Can she do that?" Frank asked, alarmed. "It's complicated. She is his blood relative, but there's a lot of water under that bridge." Ken glanced back toward the kitchen where Tyler was helping Diane with the dishes. "That boy's been through enough." Frank couldn't have agreed more. The next week passed in a tense blur. Tyler's caseworker confirmed that his grandmother, Linda Williams, had indeed filed paperwork requesting visitation rights, with the stated goal of eventually regaining custody. Tyler had become quiet again. His enthusiasm in class dimmed like a light switched to low power. On Thursday, Frank stopped by the school counseling office to talk to Emily about his concerns. "I've been keeping an eye on him," his daughter assured him. "His teachers say he's still doing the work, but he's withdrawn." She hesitated. "Dad, you know this might not end the way we want it to, right? Courts tend to favor blood relatives. Even ones who let their boyfriends abuse their grandkids?" Frank couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "Linda Williams claims she didn't know about the abuse," Emily said gently, "and she's completed a substance abuse program, found stable housing, and has a steady job now." Frank paced the small office. "Tyler doesn't want to go back to her. Doesn't that count for anything?" "It does, but he's a minor, and the system is imperfect." Emily gave him a concerned look. "You've gotten very attached to him." "Is that a bad thing?" Frank challenged. "No, but—" Emily chose her words carefully. "I just don't want to see you hurt if things don't go the way you hope. Or Tyler hurt, for that matter." Frank knew his daughter was right to be cautious, but he also knew he couldn't stand by and watch Tyler be returned to a situation that had driven him to such desperation. That Saturday, Frank had promised to take Tyler fishing. The boy was subdued as they loaded tackle boxes into Frank's old rowboat. "We don't have to go if you're not feeling up to it," Frank offered. "No, I want to." Tyler's voice was determined, despite the worry lines creasing his young forehead. "I need to get out on the water." They rowed to the middle of Lake Willow, where Frank dropped anchor. The morning was peaceful, mist rising off the water as the sun climbed higher. They cast their lines in comfortable silence, each lost in thought. After a while, Tyler said, "I have to meet with my grandma next week. Supervised visit." Frank nodded, keeping his expression neutral despite the twist of anxiety in his stomach. "How do you feel about that?" Tyler shrugged, eyes on his bobber. "Scared, I guess. It's been months since I've seen her." "That's understandable." "What if—" Tyler took a deep breath. "What if they make me go back to her?" Frank set down his fishing rod and turned to face the boy fully. "Tyler, look at me." Reluctantly, Tyler met his gaze. "Whatever happens," Frank said firmly, "you will not be alone. I promise you that. If they send you back to your grandma, I'll still be here. You can still come over, still call me day or night. Nothing will change that." Tyler's eyes filled with tears. "But it won't be the same." "No," Frank admitted. "It won't. But we'll make it work." They fished a while longer, the silence now heavier. Eventually, Tyler said, "My grandma used to be different, you know, before Rick. She used to take me to baseball games, help me with homework. Then she met him, and it was like she forgot how to be my grandma." Frank nodded. "People sometimes lose their way when they're with the wrong person." "Yeah," Tyler agreed. Do you think maybe she could find her way back?" The question caught Frank off guard. For all his concern about Tyler potentially returning to his grandmother, he hadn't considered that the boy might harbor hope for reconciliation. "It's possible," he said carefully. "People can change if they really want to." Tyler nodded, then suddenly jerked upright. "I got a bite." The serious conversation was temporarily forgotten as Tyler reeled in a decent-sized bass, his face lighting up with excitement. They caught 3 more fish before heading back to shore, enough for the dinner Frank had planned. As they cleaned the fish on the dock, Tyler asked, "Will you come with me? To meet my grandma?" Frank hesitated. He wasn't sure if his presence would help or hurt the situation. "I don't know if they'll let me, buddy. These visits are usually just family and the caseworker." "You're more family to me than she is now," Tyler said with sudden fierceness. The words warmed Frank's heart even as they worried him. If Tyler was sent back to his grandmother, such feelings could make the transition even harder. "I'll talk to Sarah," Frank promised. "See what's possible." The following Wednesday, Frank found himself sitting in a small room at the Family Services building, Tyler beside him, waiting for Linda Williams to arrive. Sarah, the caseworker, had reluctantly agreed to Frank's presence after Tyler had insisted. "Remember," Sarah cautioned, "this is just a first step, a chance for Tyler and his grandmother to reconnect under safe conditions." Frank nodded, though his jaw was tight. Tyler sat perfectly still, hands clasped in his lap. When the door finally opened, Frank felt the boy tense beside him. Linda Williams was a thin woman who looked older than her 57 years. Her hair, dyed an unnatural shade of red, was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore a waitress uniform under her coat. She stopped short when she saw Frank. "Who's this?" she asked, her voice scratchy from years of smoking. "This is Mr. Mason," Sarah explained. "Tyler asked for him to be here today?" Linda's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded and took a seat across from them. "Hello, Tyler." "Hi, Grandma," Tyler replied, his voice barely audible. An awkward silence fell. Linda fidgeted with the strap of her purse. "You look good," she finally said. "Healthy." Tyler nodded but didn't speak. "I've been getting myself together," Linda continued. "Got a job at the Bluebird Diner. Been clean for 5 months now." "That's good," Tyler managed. Linda's eyes flicked to Frank, then back to her grandson. "I'm real sorry about what happened, Tyler. With Rick and everything. I should have protected you better." Tyler stared at his hands. Frank could feel him trembling slightly. "I told the cops everything," Linda went on. "Made sure they knew what he did to you. He's going away for a long time." Another silence stretched between them. Frank resisted the urge to fill it, to defend Tyler from having to respond. This was their moment to navigate, however painful. "Why didn't you believe me?" Tyler finally asked, his voice stronger now. "When I tried to tell you what he was doing?" Linda flinched as if she'd been slapped. "I don't know, baby. I was drinking a lot then, and Rick, he had a way of twisting things around, making me doubt what was right in front of me." She wiped at her eyes. "That's not an excuse. There ain't no excuse for what I let happen, but I'm trying to make it right now." "By taking me away from the Pattersons?" Tyler's voice cracked. "Away from my school? From Frank?" Linda looked confused. "Frank?" "Mr. Mason," Tyler clarified, gesturing to Frank. "He saved my life. When I tried to—" He couldn't finish. Understanding dawned on Linda's face. "You're the man who pulled him from the lake." Frank nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "And now you're, what? Trying to be his grandfather or something?" There was an edge to her voice. "No, ma'am," Frank said calmly. "I'm just trying to be his friend." Sarah stepped in smoothly. "Mr. Mason has been a positive influence in Tyler's life. He's Tyler's teacher and mentor through a school program." Linda's posture relaxed slightly. "Well, I suppose I should thank you then. For saving my grandson." The rest of the visit passed in strained small talk. Linda told Tyler about her new apartment, how she'd reconnected with her sister, how she was going to meetings 3 times a week. Tyler gradually opened up a bit, telling her about school but carefully avoiding any mention of Frank's lake house or the Pattersons. When their time was up, Linda stood awkwardly. "Can I hug you?" she asked Tyler. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. The hug was brief and stiff, but it happened. As Linda turned to go, she paused by Frank's chair. "Mr. Mason," she said quietly, "can I have a word in private?" Frank glanced at Sarah, who nodded. "Tyler and I will wait in my office," she said, guiding the boy out. When they were alone, Linda fixed Frank with a direct stare. "You care about my grandson?" It wasn't a question, but Frank answered anyway. "Very much." "He seems to care about you too." She twisted her hands together. "I'm trying to do right by him now. Better late than never, they say." "Tyler deserves stability," Frank said carefully. "He's doing well with the Pattersons, excelling in school. Are you telling me I shouldn't try to get him back?" Linda's voice hardened. "I'm saying whatever happens should be what's best for Tyler," Frank replied. "Not what's best for you or me or anyone else." Linda studied him for a long moment. "I'm his family," she finally said. "His blood. That counts for something." "It does," Frank agreed. "But so does safety. Trust. A chance to heal." Linda nodded slowly. "I hear you." She headed for the door, then paused. "This ain't over, Mr. Mason, but I appreciate you being straight with me." After she left, Frank sat alone in the small room, a heavy weight settling on his shoulders. Linda Williams wasn't the monster he'd imagined. She was a flawed person trying to make amends. That made the situation both better and infinitely more complicated. On the drive back to the Pattersons, Tyler was quiet, staring out the window at the autumn leaves beginning to turn. "You did good in there," Frank told him. "She's different," Tyler said after a while. "Clearer, somehow." "Yes, she seems to be trying." Tyler turned to look at him. "Does that mean I have to go back to her?" Frank chose his words carefully. "It means the court will have more to consider. It's not a simple case anymore." They rode in silence for several minutes before Tyler spoke again. "If I do have to go back, will you still take me fishing sometimes?" Frank's heart squeezed painfully in his chest. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. That night, after dropping Tyler off, Frank sat alone on his deck overlooking the lake. The water was black under the moonless sky, reflecting nothing but a few distant stars. He thought of the angry, bitter woman he'd expected Linda Williams to be, and the complicated, trying to reform person she actually was. He thought of Tyler, caught between the grandmother who had failed him and the new life he was building. He thought of himself, unexpectedly attached to a boy who had literally been drowning when they met. Frank had no illusions about how the court would likely rule if Linda Williams continued her progress. Blood ties carried weight. Second chances were a cornerstone of the legal system. What would happen to Tyler then? What would happen to the fragile foundation the boy had built? As a teacher, Frank had learned long ago that you couldn't save every child. You did your best, and then you had to let go. But this felt different. This felt like standing on the shore watching someone drown all over again, only this time in slow motion. Frank took out his phone and dialed Emily's number. His daughter answered on the third ring, her voice sleepy. "Dad, is everything okay?" "I need some advice," Frank said, his gaze fixed on the dark water. "If I wanted to become a foster parent, where would I start?" Winter settled over Lake Willow, transforming the water into a smooth sheet of ice thick enough for skating. Christmas lights twinkled from the eaves of Frank's house, reflecting in multicolored patterns on the frozen surface below. Inside, a fire crackled in the stone fireplace, warming the living room where Frank sat reviewing a stack of foster care paperwork. "Dad, this is insane," Emily said, curled up in the armchair across from him. "The approval process takes months, and there's no guarantee the court would place Tyler with you anyway." Frank set down his reading glasses. "I have to try, Em. His grandmother's hearing is in February. If the judge grants her petition—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Over the past 2 months, Linda Williams had continued making progress, keeping her job, maintaining sobriety, attending all required parenting classes. Her case for regaining custody was growing stronger by the week. "I know you care about Tyler," Emily said gently, "but have you really thought this through? You're 63, living alone, working full-time." "Plenty of grandparents raise teenagers," Frank pointed out. "Besides, I'm thinking of retiring at the end of this school year." Emily sighed. "And what does Tyler think about all this?" "I haven't told him." Frank rubbed his temples. "I don't want to get his hopes up if it doesn't work out." The sound of tires crunching on snow interrupted their conversation. Frank glanced out the window to see Ken Patterson's truck pulling into the driveway, Tyler jumping out before the vehicle had fully stopped. "He's here," Frank said, hastily gathering the foster care documents and shoving them into a drawer. "Not a word about this, okay?" Emily nodded, though her expression remained concerned. Tyler burst through the front door in a flurry of cold air and excitement, a wrapped package tucked under his arm. "Frank, I got my report card." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and thrust it towards Frank, barely pausing to greet Emily. Frank opened it, already smiling. "Straight A's. I knew you could do it." "Physics was the hardest, even with you as my teacher," Tyler admitted, grinning. "But I studied extra with Jessica Wilson. She's really good with the formulas." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Jessica Wilson, huh? Isn't she the one with the—" "Dad," Emily interrupted, laughing. "Stop embarrassing him." Tyler's cheeks flushed. "She's just helping me study," he mumbled, though his small smile told a different story. "Well, this calls for a celebration," Frank declared. "How about pizza? My treat." Later, after Emily had gone home and they'd demolished 2 large pizzas, Frank and Tyler sat on the back deck bundled in heavy coats, watching the stars through Frank's telescope. Despite the cold, it was a clear night, perfect for stargazing. "I had another visit with my grandma yesterday," Tyler said, adjusting the telescope's focus. "She's got her own apartment now, 2 bedrooms. Frank's chest tightened. "That's good. How did it go?" "Okay, I guess." Tyler stepped back from the telescope. "She's trying really hard. Keeps telling me how much she's changed. Do you believe her?" Tyler was quiet for a long moment. "I think I do," he finally said. "She seems clearer now, like she can actually see me." He kicked at a small pile of snow with his boot. "She talked about me moving in with her after the hearing." Frank struggled to keep his expression neutral. "How do you feel about that?" "Scared," Tyler admitted. "But also, I don't know. She's my grandma, you know? Before Rick, things were good with her." "You can care about her and still be concerned," Frank said carefully. "It's complicated." Tyler nodded. "Yeah." He looked out over the frozen lake. "If I do end up living with her, could I still come here sometimes? Visit you?" "Always," Frank said firmly. "My door is always open to you, no matter what." Tyler seemed relieved. "Good, because I need someone to help me with college applications next year. The Pattersons are great, but they don't know much about that stuff." Frank smiled, touched by Tyler's assumption that he would remain part of his life even after high school. "I'd be honored to help. Have you thought about where you want to apply?" "State University has a good physics program," Tyler said, "and it's close enough that I could come home on weekends." Home. The word hung in the air between them, its meaning uncertain. January brought more snow and more visits between Tyler and his grandmother. Each time, Tyler returned with stories about Linda's new life, how she'd joined a church, reconnected with her sister, even started taking online courses to finish her GED. Frank listened, offering encouraging words while silently filing his own foster care application. One evening in late January, Tyler called, his voice tight with excitement. "Frank, can I come over tonight? I need to talk to you about something." "Of course," Frank said. "Everything okay?" Yeah, I need your advice. An hour later, they sat at Frank's kitchen table, mugs of hot chocolate between them. Tyler fidgeted, unusually nervous. What's on your mind, buddy? Frank prompted. Tyler took a deep breath. My grandma asked me something today. Something big. He paused. She wants to know if I want to move back in with her. Frank's hand tightened around his mug. I thought that was already the plan, if the court approves. It was, but… Tyler looked up, meeting Frank's eyes. She said if I'm happier with the Pattersons, she won't fight it. She'll tell the judge she wants what's best for me, even if that means staying where I am. Frank was stunned. This wasn't the outcome he'd expected. That's quite a change. Tyler nodded. She said she's been watching how I've been doing these past months, how much better I am now. He swallowed hard. She said she loves me enough to let me go, if that's what I need. That's very selfless of her, Frank said, genuinely impressed. Yeah. Tyler stared into his hot chocolate. The thing is, I don't know what to do. The Pattersons are great, and I'm doing well in school, and I've got friends now. But she's my grandma, you know, my only real family. Frank chose his words carefully. What does your heart tell you? That's the problem. It's telling me two different things. Tyler looked miserable. Part of me wants to give her another chance, to help her stay on track, like she's helped me. But another part is scared it won't last, that something will happen and we'll end up back where we were. Frank understood that fear all too well. Have you talked to your caseworker about this? Yeah. Sarah says it's up to me, that the judge will take my wishes into account. Tyler's eyes filled with tears. But how do I choose? What if I make the wrong decision? Frank reached across the table and squeezed Tyler's hand. Sometimes in life, there is no perfect choice. Just different paths with different challenges. What would you do? Tyler asked, his voice small. Frank hesitated. Every instinct told him to protect Tyler, to encourage him to stay with the Pattersons where he was safe and thriving. But he also recognized the pull of family, the importance of those blood connections. I can't answer that for you, he finally said, but I can promise you this. Whatever you decide, I'm in your corner. Always. Tyler nodded, wiping his eyes. I have to decide by next week, before the hearing. The days that followed were tense. Frank threw himself into his teaching, trying not to hover over Tyler at school. The foster care paperwork sat untouched in his drawer. If Tyler chose to return to his grandmother, Frank's application would be unnecessary. If he chose to stay with the Pattersons, they were already providing an excellent home. The night before the hearing, Frank couldn't sleep. He sat on his deck despite the cold, watching the moonlight on the frozen lake. His phone rang just after midnight. Tyler's number. Hello, Frank answered, immediately alert. I made my decision, Tyler said without preamble. I wanted you to be the first to know. Frank held his breath. And? I'm going to live with my grandma. Despite having prepared himself for this possibility, Frank felt the news like a physical blow. I see, he managed. Are you sure? Yeah, Tyler said, his voice steadier than Frank had expected. She's really trying, Frank, and she needs me too. The Pattersons have each other and other foster kids who need them, but Grandma's all alone. Frank swallowed the lump in his throat. Then I think you're making a brave choice. You're not mad? Tyler asked, sounding younger suddenly. Of course not. I'm proud of you. Frank meant it, despite the ache in his chest. Family is important. Your family too, Tyler said firmly. Just a different kind. The next day, Frank sat in the back of the courtroom as the judge reviewed Linda Williams's petition for custody. Tyler sat beside his grandmother, looking small in the button-up shirt and tie the Pattersons had bought him for the occasion. When asked for his preference, Tyler spoke clearly about wanting to live with his grandmother while continuing his education at his current school. The judge, a stern-faced woman with silver-streaked hair, studied the reports before her. "Ms. Williams, your progress is commendable," she said. "However, given the history here, I'm inclined to proceed with caution." She turned to Tyler. "Young man, your wishes matter greatly in this court, but so does your well-being." Frank held his breath, sensing the direction the ruling was taking. "Therefore," the judge continued, "I'm granting a transitional custody arrangement. Tyler will live with his grandmother on weekends for the next 3 months, while continuing to reside with the Patterson family during the week. After the 3-month period, assuming all goes well, full custody will transfer to Ms. Williams." Relief and disappointment mingled in Frank's chest. It was a sensible compromise, giving Tyler time to adjust while ensuring his grandmother continued her positive changes. After the hearing, Tyler found Frank in the hallway. "Did you hear? I get to try it out first, like a test run." "I heard," Frank said, smiling at the boy's enthusiasm. "I think it's a wise decision." Linda Williams approached them hesitantly. She looked better than Frank had ever seen her. Well-dressed, clear-eyed, her hair neatly styled. "Mr. Mason," she greeted him, "I want to thank you for everything you've done for Tyler." Frank nodded politely. "He's a remarkable young man." "Yes, he is." Linda glanced at her grandson with undisguised pride. "I want you to know that you're welcome to visit any time. Tyler speaks very highly of you." "Thank you," Frank said, genuinely surprised by the invitation. As winter melted into spring, the transitional arrangement proved successful. Tyler spent weekdays with the Pattersons, focusing on school and friends, and weekends with his grandmother, rebuilding their relationship one day at a time. Frank remained a constant in his life, hosting stargazing nights and helping with challenging homework assignments. One Friday in late April, exactly 1 year after Frank had pulled Tyler from the lake, they met at the dock behind Frank's house. The ice had long since thawed, and the water sparkled in the afternoon sun. "Want to take the boat out?" Frank offered. "The fish should be biting." Tyler hesitated, looking out over the water. "Actually, I was thinking maybe we could try swimming instead." Frank stared at him in surprise. Tyler hadn't gone into the lake since that fateful morning. "Are you sure?" Tyler nodded. "I need to, you know. Face it." "It's still pretty cold," Frank warned. "I know, but you'll be there, right?" "Always," Frank promised. They changed into swim trunks, and Frank waded in first, gasping at the chill. Tyler followed more slowly, his face set in determination. When the water reached his chest, he stopped, his breathing quick and shallow. "You're doing great," Frank encouraged. "We don't have to go any deeper." Tyler shook his head. "I want to." He took a deep breath and ducked under the surface, reappearing a moment later with a triumphant smile. "I did it." "You sure did." Frank couldn't hide his pride. They didn't stay in long. The water was indeed too cold for comfort. But as they wrapped themselves in towels on the dock, Tyler's accomplishment hung between them like a tangible thing. "I start living with my grandma full-time next week," Tyler said, rubbing his hair dry. "The judge signed off on it yesterday." Frank nodded. He'd known this was coming. "How do you feel about it?" "Good, actually. We've been getting along really well." Tyler looked up at the sky where the first stars were appearing. "She's asking me to help her pick out classes for next semester. She wants to become a counselor someday, can you believe it? To help other families like ours." "That's wonderful," Frank said sincerely. "But I'm gonna miss this," Tyler admitted, gesturing to the lake, the house. "Being here." "You're welcome any time," Frank reminded him. "The guest room is always yours when you want it." Tyler smiled. "I know." He hesitated. "Frank, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "That day you pulled me out of the lake. Were you scared?" Frank considered the question. "Terrified," he admitted. "Not just that I wouldn't reach you in time, but that even if I did—" He trailed off, not wanting to finish the thought. "That I wouldn't want to be saved," Tyler finished for him. Frank nodded. "I'm glad you didn't listen to what I wanted that day," Tyler said quietly. "I couldn't see past the pain. I couldn't imagine things ever being different. And now?" Tyler looked out over the lake, peaceful in the gathering dusk. "Now I can see a future. College, maybe a career in science, helping my grandma stay on track." He turned to Frank with a smile. "Coming back here for holidays and summers, if that's okay." "More than okay," Frank assured him, his throat tight with emotion. As they walked back to the house, Frank found himself thinking about the strange paths life could take. A year ago, he'd been a lonely widower going through the motions, his teaching the only thing that gave his days purpose. Now he was part of an unusual extended family. Tyler, the Pattersons, even Linda Williams in her way. That summer, Frank finally submitted his retirement paperwork. After 36 years of teaching, it was time. But he wasn't stepping away from mentoring entirely. The school had asked if he would continue running the New Horizons program as a volunteer, working with students who needed extra support. On his last day of classes, his fellow teachers threw a retirement party. Tyler came, along with his grandmother. So did Emily and her family, and even Michael flew in from Seattle for the occasion. As Frank looked around at the gathering, he felt a contentment he hadn't experienced since before his wife's passing. Later, as the party wound down, Tyler approached with a wrapped gift. "I wanted to give you this," he said, suddenly shy. "For everything." Frank unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a framed photograph of the two of them on the dock, fishing rods in hand, sunset painting the sky behind them. The frame was wooden, handmade. Tyler had taken woodworking as an elective that year. "I love it," Frank said, genuinely touched. "It's perfect." "There's an inscription on the back," Tyler said. Frank turned the frame over. Carved into the wood in careful letters were the words, "To Frank. Thank you for teaching me that sometimes the end is really just the beginning." As Frank pulled Tyler into a hug, he thought about second chances. How Tyler had been given one that April morning when Frank pulled him from the lake. How Frank himself had been granted one when a desperate boy gave him a reason to fully engage with life again. How sometimes rescue came in unexpected forms, and healing happened in the places where our broken edges fit together. That evening, after everyone had gone, Frank sat alone on his deck watching the stars emerge above the lake. Tomorrow, Tyler would help him clean out his classroom. Next week, Linda would host a graduation party for one of her GED classmates, and Frank was invited. The weekend after, the Pattersons were bringing their new foster child, a 12-year-old girl named Sophia, to meet Frank, thinking he might be a good mentor for her too. Life went on, flowing like water, finding new channels when old ones became blocked. Frank had spent decades teaching science, explaining how the physical world worked. But it was Tyler who had taught him the most important lesson of all, that even in our darkest moments we are never truly alone, that sometimes reaching out a hand, or accepting the one that's offered, makes all the difference. As the first fireflies of summer began to dance over the lake, Frank smiled. This wasn't an ending at all. It was simply the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another, and he couldn't wait to see what the next page would bring.